Hello everybody. For today's episode we're sticking to our knitting and featuring another artist who, like the artists in our last two episodes, was operating in Dunedin in the 1880s. Colin Mackay was born in Coleraine in Northern Ireland in 1848. He was the son of Reverend J.W. Mackay, who would become president of the Methodist College in Belfast. After finishing his schooling there, Colin became an apprentice in the Belfast shipyards for shipbuilding firm Harland and Wolff, the company that would later become famous for building ocean liners for the White Star Line, including the Olympic, the Britannic, and the Titanic. By the time he was in his early 20s, Colin had been promoted to an important position in the firm's drafting section, but then he left the company to pursue a career as an artist in London. A younger brother, Wallace, also moved to London to become an artist and would become a well-known illustrator and cartoonist there before taking his own life in 1907. Colin, on the other hand, chose not to settle in London. In 1875, we find him listed as a 27-year-old machinist travelling on the ship Auckland, bound from Greenock in Scotland to Port Chalmers in New Zealand. 22-year-old domestic servant Margaret Veitch was also on board the Auckland, and on the 13th of December 1875, about 6 weeks after arriving at Port Chalmers, Colin and Margaret got married at Knox Church in Dunedin. Eleanor Emily, the first of 6 children, was born the following September in Timaru. The Mackays appear to have still been residing in South Canterbury in 1877, when Colin painted a backdrop depicting ancient Greece for a production at Timaru's Theatre Royal, and more stage scenery for another production there in 1878. But by at least 1880, the Mackays had moved to Dunedin. Here we find Colin producing portraits such as these. This is James and Mary Ann Christie, who had arrived on the Philip Lang in 1848 and settled at Company Bay on the Otago Peninsula. Now, as you can see, James, like many other men back in the day, had a great mop of hair and bushy beard. I'm not sure whether this was a blessing or a curse the time he got attacked by a swarm of bees. It presumably saved him from a few extra stings, but it supposedly took Mary Ann and others a considerable amount of time to comb the bees out of his hair and whiskers once the swarm had been dispersed. Peter Forrester and Isabella Ritchie married at Knox Church in January 1863 and had at least 6 children before Isabella died of tuberculosis in 1878, although many of the children didn't survive into adulthood. In January 1879, 39-year-old Peter Forrester remarried. Knox Church was again the venue. This time the bride was 22-year-old Amelia Ann Ellis, who we see here in this photograph hand-coloured by Colin Mackay in 1880. Peter would have about 7 more children with Amelia, the last of whom was born in 1891, the same year Peter died, aged 55, leaving Amelia as a widow in her mid-30s with 6 surviving children under the age of about 12. James Kincaid was a Scottish blacksmith who first emigrated to Australia in 1854 before coming to Dunedin in 1862, followed by his wife and daughters. Along with fellow Scot Charles McQueen, who he'd met in Australia, Kincaid established Kincaid, McQueen and Company, incorporating the Vulcan Foundry and Dunedin Boiler Works. James Kincaid died in 1880, so Colin Mackay's 1881 drawing is likely based on this photograph. In 1881, Mackay produced drawings for supplements to the Illustrated New Zealand Herald, which was published in Dunedin. In March, the subject of his picture was the race meeting held at Forbury Park on the 24th, 25th and 26th of February, where the feature race, the Dunedin Cup, was won by North Otago landowner and politician Robert Campbell's horse, Sir Modred. The scene at the bottom right references a story we've come across in an earlier episode of Talking Pictures. The night before the race meeting, 6 men and a driver were travelling in a 2-horse cab when it was struck by a goods train at the Kensington railway crossing. Henry Mayo was the most badly injured of the passengers. He died in hospital on the final day of the race meeting, 3 days after the accident. On the 21st of May 1881, the biggest fire to hit Timaru in more than a decade saw the destruction of the Waitangi flour mill. As well as a sketch of the burning mill, Collins supplied views of the Timaru government buildings, Washdyke Lagoon, and the breakwater at the port, and the local convent. And in these sketches, he gives us an idea of what could be seen on display at the Dunedin Industrial Exhibition that was staged in June 1881, along with a view of Murray's new confectionery factory, which we also saw in one of John Crawford's paintings back in episode 59 of Talking Pictures. One of the big events of the 1880s was the 1886 eruption of Mount Tarawera and the destruction of the pink and white terraces. A plethora of artworks was created in the wake of the disaster. We saw these watercolours by George O'Brien in episode 3 of Talking Pictures, for example. Mackay and 3 fellow artists, L.W. Wilson, Harry Kirkwood and Frank Brooks Smith, inspired by photographs by the views of O'Brien and sketches by interpreter at Rotorua Mr. Edwards, who drew the scene as the disaster unfolded, painted a tableau of the event that was then sent for display at venues in England. Colin Mackay was not just an artist. An obituary following his death in 1935 tells us that he also returned to engineering pursuits after quitting Great Britain in 1875 and moving to New Zealand. As an engineer, he would design several machines for use in manufacturing, most notably a machine for producing barbed wire. However, neither art nor invention were money spinners in the tough times of the Long Depression, it would seem. With debts of over £120, artist Colin Mackay of Dunedin filed for bankruptcy in February 1881, and mechanical engineer Colin Mackay of Dunedin did likewise in 1886. Mackay was far from being the only barbed wire manufacturer in New Zealand, but his invention was different enough to secure patents in parts of Australia, and he also sought to patent it in Great Britain. Samples were sent for display at the Colonial and Indian Exhibition in London in 1886, and at the Melbourne Centennial Exhibition in 1888 it received honourable mention. The Mackays moved to Melbourne in the wake of the 1888 exhibition. They lived there for 11 years, before relocating to Western Australia in 1900, and seeing out their days in or near Perth. Margaret passed away in 1926, aged 75, and Colin was 87 when he died in 1935. That's it for this episode. See you next time, and thanks for watching.